Welcome to today's Explainer. We're about to unlock one of the most fascinating historical mysteries ever recorded, the story of Dhul Qarnayn. Now, you might be wondering who that is. Well, he's a figure totally shrouded in antiquity, known as a ruler of unmatched global power, a remarkably just leader, and, as we're going to see today, an absolute master of ancient engineering. But who was he really? How did he govern? And honestly, most intriguingly, how did he manage to construct an indestructible metallic barrier that has literally baffled historians and engineers for centuries? By looking at classical exegesis from Al-Qurtubi, modern governance analysis, and some seriously deep engineering breakdowns, we're going to decode this legendary figure together. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 4 parts. 1. Who is Dhul Qarnayn? 2. The just leader's methodology. 3. The 3 journeys. And finally 4. Engineering the Great Barrier. All right, starting off with part 1, who is Dhul Qarnayn? Let's dig into his identity and origins. So who really was this guy? To figure that out, we've got to look at the classical texts, specifically the renowned exegesis by Al-Qurtubi. There was a huge debate going on. Was Dhul Qarnayn just an earthly king? Was he an angel? Maybe a prophet? According to Al-Qurtubi's records, when Ali bin Abi Talib was asked this exact question, he completely cleared the air. He clarified that Dhul Qarnayn wasn't a prophet and he wasn't an angel either. Instead, he was a deeply righteous servant of God who was granted just immense, sweeping dominion across the entire earth. Now, when historians try to actually pin down a specific name to the legend, 2 major theories always pop up. On one hand, you've got scholars arguing he was Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king whose conquests stretched all the way across the known world. But on the other side, there's this really strong tradition pointing to Al-Sab bin Yazan, a massively powerful Himyarite ruler from Yemen. And while the ancient texts don't totally settle on a single definitive answer, both of these theories really hit the nail on the head regarding his status. They both describe a legendary conqueror whose empire literally spanned from the east to the west. And that actually brings us right to his name, Dhul Qarnayn. It literally translates to the two-horned one. But what does that even mean in this context? Well, Al-Qurtubi breaks down a few linguistic interpretations for us. Some folks say it's purely geographical, that it means he reached the 2 literal horns, or the extreme edges of the sun's path, basically the farthest east and the farthest west. But others suggest it was a physical description. They note he might have had 2 distinct braids in his hair, or, more likely, that he wore this specialized, intimidating 2-horned copper helmet into battle. Moving on to part 2, the just leader's methodology. Let's look at his principles of governance. This is where we shift from historical mystery to his actual statecraft, and we start to see this fascinating set of core leadership traits. What's absolutely incredible here is the balance. I mean, think about it. You have a ruler with absolute global power, vast wealth, and unstoppable military might. Yet his rule was completely characterized by justice, patience, courage, chastity, and gratitude. He never ever allowed the intoxication of that power to corrupt his mission. It's a really rare kind of humility. So the crucial point is that this wasn't just some personal philosophy he kept to himself. This was basically his established constitution. He said, "As for him who does wrong, we will punish him. But as for him who believes and acts righteously, he will have a good reward." It was a methodology of governance based entirely on fair rewards and strict punishments. Oppressors faced immediate, earthly justice, while the righteous were treated with total dignity. He essentially brought order to chaotic lands. Okay. Part 3, the 3 journeys of empowerment. Let's trace his geopolitical campaigns. He actually took this constitutional approach and put it into practice all across his massive empire, creating this fascinating geopolitical timeline. Stage 1 took him to the extreme west, to this murky body of water where the sun appeared to set. Then Stage 2 took him all the way to the extreme east, to a population living directly under the rising sun with absolutely no shelter. But it's really Stage 3 that we're going to focus on today. This was a fateful expedition to a very vulnerable valley, situated right between 2 massive parallel mountain ranges. Down in this valley, he runs into a completely helpless population. The texts note that they could scarcely understand a word, which basically implies they lacked sophistication, communication skills, and definitely lacked any basic defensive infrastructure. And they were terrified, absolutely paralyzed by the constant, brutal raids of 2 tribes known as Gog and Magog. Desperate, they actually offered Dhul Qarnayn a massive bribe, a huge financial tribute, if he would just build a barrier to protect them. And that brings us to part 4, the engineering of the Great Barrier. This is where the ancient mechanics really shine. Now, what's really interesting about this is exactly how he responded to their plea. First, we have to demystify a crucial linguistic difference here. The frightened locals, they just asked him to build a sod, which is just a simple, basic wall. But he flat out refuses their money. Instead of just taking their gold and keeping them dependent on him, he elevates their request. He tells them he's going to help them build a rodam. A rodam is a highly engineered, layered composite barrier. By doing this, he completely transformed a victimized population into an empowered active workforce. So how do you even build a rodam? The text breaks down the pre-construction phase step by step. Step 1. He surveyed the entire valley to find the absolute narrowest point between the two mountains just to minimize the material they'd need. Step 2. He had the workers excavate this deep foundation trench right into the bedrock, ensuring the structure couldn't be undermined by the enemy. Step 3. They built 2 massive parallel limestone retaining walls. This effectively created an enormous hollow box, or a giant mold, right between the mountains. Next up came the filling material. The primary ingredient was something called zubar al-hadid. The engineering sources explained that this wasn't fully processed smelted iron metal. It was blocks of raw iron ore, specifically hematite, broken down into fist-sized chunks. Now you might ask, why raw ore? Well, for a project of this massive, valley-spanning scale, smelting thousands of tons of iron beforehand in traditional little furnaces was practically impossible. They needed a much more ingenious method. And this is where the thermal engineering gets literally mind-blowing. Inside that massive limestone box they just built, they didn't just dump the iron chunks in a pile. No, they carefully layered the iron ore with coal and dry wood. Furthermore, they deliberately left tunnels at the bottom of those retaining walls. So when they ignited the top, the natural draft of air just rushed in through those bottom tunnels. This natural convection turned the entire valley-sized structure into one colossal thermodynamic forge. The heat intensified and intensified until those raw iron chunks were literally glowing red hot. But here's the thing. Hot iron alone isn't enough. It has gaps, and over time, it rusts. Enter Kitcher. The text defines Kitcher as liquid molten copper. The sources strongly suggest Dhul Qarnayn utilized a nearby volcanic vent or set up a massive copper smelting operation right next to the site. Once that iron and cal matrix was superheated, he ordered this blindingly hot liquid copper to be channeled and poured directly over the glowing iron rocks. And this brilliantly illustrates the genius of the final product. This process resulted in the birth of a highly advanced composite material. The iron ore served as the structural core, giving it immense bulk and impact strength. The molten copper, on the other hand, acted as the absolute perfect binder. It flowed down into every single microscopic gap, displacing all the oxygen, binding the iron pieces together, and creating an airtight, rust-proof, solid matrix. It was, quite simply, an unbreakable, unscalable wall. Yet after accomplishing what is arguably one of the greatest feats of ancient civil engineering and statecraft, look at his reaction. He just says, "This is a mercy from my Lord." He felt no ego, no arrogance whatsoever. He attributed this monumental achievement entirely to divine grace. Really, it's the ultimate testament to his balanced character, combining this unparalleled grasp of material science and global power with complete, utter spiritual humility. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to consider today. When we look at things like modern reinforced concrete or advanced aerospace composites, how much do our greatest engineering marvels still rely on these exact same ancient principles of layered materials, thermodynamics, and local resource management? Dhul Qarnayn's story isn't just some dusty historical mystery. It's an absolute masterclass in leadership and engineering that continues to echo through time. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. And remember to keep questioning the incredible history hiding behind the structures of our world.